Hey, folks, welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Today, I'm talking to someone who, I'll be honest, I never thought I was going to be able to talk to on this podcast or interact with. We are talking to Jay West. You may know him as Take. You may know him as the founder of Whiskey Raiders, as well as all of the branch organizations that came out from under that: Tequila Raiders, Gin Raiders, a number of other things. Today, that's now a former chapter. We're talking to him about his current chapter, 1787 Provenance, Middleburg Barrel Company, and the Reveries. His new company that has been getting barrels in since 2020, and we'll get into all that. But for that very long and convoluted intro, please welcome Jay West.
Hey man, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. I haven't figured out my elevator pitch either, so I think you did a darn good job.
Fair enough. Uh, I mean, you only fully moved on to this, half a year ago or so after went on from Whiskey Raiders and such. So you've got some time. You're still building.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll take it. Yeah.
so, like I said, so many of you will know Jay from his previous exploits. He's I would say, you're pretty universally known in terms of people who look at whiskey reviews and other spirits reviews. Um, I wanted to set the scene a little bit for what we're going to talk about today with the new product, the 1787 and the Reveries, to the interview you did last month with Whiskey Wednesdays. And I want to start with, you were talking about there was a point in your life, this was before all of this, poor spirits and all of that, where you really couldn't drink much. And you said you can only drink a little bit. You know, gin and tequila weren't really for you, but it's like, if I can only drink a little bit, why, in so many words, why drink crap? Like, I'm going to
Yeah,
drink
yeah.
good stuff. So that's a decade plus ago. And here you are now as head whiskey maker and producer for your own whiskey company. What has that transition been like?
Oh man, it's a deep cut. It's a breath of fresh air, honestly. I was as a 20-year-old, 21-year-old, you're kind of like, well, this is my life. But um, I also think that if you had told me who just turned down Keystone and drink some wild turkey, that this would be like a whiskey empire at some point, I'd be like, oh man, you're crazy. I'm getting a film degree and I'm going to go to Hollywood, which was the dream at the time. But um, I think it really embodies what's really important, right? It was if you focus on really small things every day and you try and crush a few small things every day, that you kind of don't know where you'll end up, and you can actually build some momentum. And like, I kind of joke, right? That like, there's those old cartoons where like the person falls at the top of the hill and they like become a snowball, and then it becomes a really big snowball, and like, it's like a caricature. But really, this whole journey has been starting one small thing, right? Like writing a couple, like not big reviews, like a couple lines and then a paragraph about a whiskey every day for now the last 10 years, turned into a side hustle and selling a blog and becoming a media company and then leaving the media company to become a whiskey company. Like all of those things, like none of those things happen in a vacuum, but they all rely on the previous thing as like a foundational element. And now, like, building a significant single barrel program that is fueling a whiskey company. If I look back, like I couldn't have skipped any of those things and gotten here. And so I'm kind of thankful for the journey, because like, I presumably and hopefully have a couple, if not many years to go. Like, it every time we do something, it makes me more excited for what's coming. And it makes me especially excited for the whiskey releases we have company, because it's like, I know everything we've released prior, and I think we have stuff that's even cooler than that. And so like, it's kind of given me this new look of the future of like, maybe let's just not try and plan very specific things. Like I used to be a planner. I love to plan every minute of every day. And if I could plan the rest of my life, I would. And my life would be super boring if that had all worked out for me. So it's also kind of encouraged me to be like, just let's do a few small things each day and we'll see where we end up.
I hear you, and we're about the same age, if not the same age. So I hear you about wanting to schedule your life and having so many things down the line. I mean, you got to a point when you were putting up reviews that you were putting up about, and by you, I mean, I don't think it was just you, it was you and a team at that point, but you were 20 reviews a week or something like
Yeah,
that.
the well, so yeah, so when Raiders was founded, there was house reviews, which was always done by me, and then there was pure aggregation. So like, because Whiskey Raiders was founded to be the Rotten Tomatoes of the internet, right? So like, Rotten Tomatoes has like critic reviews, and then like anyone who wants to write can like publish reviews. And so, my goal was always one a day. I felt like one a day was the combination of being wildly productive, but also like a little bit responsible. So, uh, yeah, I'd say we would try to keep to like 5 house reviews and then like 20 to 50 aggregates every week. So it was pretty significant. But the house reviews are the only ones that I like tasted and did myself.
Gotcha, gotcha. And yeah, I mean, you started this in 2015, started writing and publishing in 2015. This is, like I said, a decade in. And during that time, especially since the last 5 years, you've spoken about the pandemic as being a significant inflection point for you in really two different ways. The first being that single barrels became easier to do in a certain way. It wasn't as experiential because you couldn't always go to the place to do it, but it became more available because kits were being sent out. And then the second half of that being it drove people online. So I'd love to hear just more about that, how that inflection point has aged and how it's informing what you're doing now.
Yeah, COVID was fascinating, right? Like my living room was always Reddit and the internet. Like I was very comfortable talking with people about spirits on the internet. And thankfully I'd found lots of people who were very comfortable talking to me about spirits on the internet. So, you know, COVID was a bad time for a lot of people. And I think it was still a net loss for everyone. But the silver lining of COVID was that it taught people a totally different way to think about spirits, which was like, yeah, if we're going to talk to each other about whiskey, we're going to have to do it on the internet. And so people looked for established sources of talking about whiskey on the internet, which was thankfully, was Reddit was one of them. But the most important part of Reddit to me, and the most important part of what we learned in COVID was that it taught people that community was anywhere people are talking about this kind of stuff. And, especially as we build Provenance, like it's hugely important to us what people think about whiskey, but also to know where people are going to talk about whiskey and to be present in the places where people are kind of I don't want to say like the themes of the whiskey industry change every year, but there's a couple fads every year, and then there's these greater strokes, right? Like single barrels were actually pretty pivotal, or sorry, pivotal to the industry. Where like a lot of brands actually were like, nah, we're not going to do single barrels, and then COVID started, and people were like, actually, there's huge demand for single barrels, and now we're a single barrel company, and so it was interesting to see that new chapter open because that chapter is kind of one that I've always followed, right? Like the single barrel program that I run exploded during COVID. And unlike a lot of programs that have kind of waned after COVID, it stayed big. It continues to get bigger. And those relationships are what actually fueled Provenance in the beginning because I got to meet all these producers first virtually. And then I've spent the last call it like 3.5, 4 years, like spending like half the year, if not more, on airplanes to go meet these producers, right? Like we met over COVID. I did some barrels, but like what fuels me and what fuels a lot of what we do is like going to meet these people and see how they do business. How do they do whiskey? How do they do blending? How do they do barrel curation and stuff? And so learning from all of those producers that I met during COVID and actually having the time and the opportunity, the privilege to go and visit them means we had all these really great relationships when it was time to start sourcing whiskey for Provenance. And the goal with Provenance is that hopefully, if we do it right, I will never distill because my background is not in distilling, and I am not tuned to be a good distiller. And if we were to distill, I would need to bring on a really competent distilling team, which just isn't in the cards for this foreseeable future. But I've met I've met tons, if not hundreds, of some of the most competent distillers I could ever think and hope to have met through all of those things that started with COVID. And now like we have production partners and like probably 10 or 12 right now that are making incredible whiskey that I'm pulling in for Provenance. We're going to age, blend, and bottle in Middleburg. And so, like I talked about in the beginning, like it wouldn't have gotten here if not for any of those other smaller steps along the way. But COVID kind of kicked it off. It let me build a massive single barrel program and really start to get tight with producers. And the more I talked with these producers, the more I learned about them. And then I visited their facilities and met them and their teams and realized like these guys are making great whiskey. And a lot of times I'd ask them like, can I buy some? Like I have my own crazy ideas and I want to blend this with some stuff for some other distillers. And some of them started to say like, hell yeah, man, let's do it. And so, I really credit COVID is kicking off this whiskey on the internet thing, which ironically began to fuel a whiskey brand that is, it's not an internet whiskey brand. Like we sell on the internet and stuff, but like, to build a facility and a property where people now can talk about it on the internet, but actually physically come and experience it. So it feels very full circle to me.
And Virginia as itself. So we should note before I get into Virginia, the Middleburg estate, now Provenance. I keep wanting to say Provenance like a French style. I don't know why. But so I might slip in and out of that. But so Provenance Estate now was acquired in 2020. Uh, Before this is, in during COVID, around the time that COVID started, you're not in DC at that point. You're living in your prior area, not quite built up the single barrel program yet. So, what was the moment where you became intertwined with what the purchase of the Middleburg estate made possible?
Yeah, so VS Syndrome, who's my partner, and one of the founders, and I see him every day, and we talk every day, and talk whiskey all the time. So he acquired the property um, during COVID as a place to basically, like, everyone felt a little trapped during COVID, and everyone needed a little bit of space. And so, like, he'd also retired from tech, so he could basically, hit one of his favorite quotes is he wanted to be the only dad at the playground. He wanted to be the only dad picking up kids at daycare. And so he left that, but with COVID realized like he also wanted a place for his kids to grow up and have some space outside and like experience the elements and experience kind of the circle of life and like agriculture, but also kind of the responsibility we have in conservation and stuff like that, right? Like DC is not as concrete jungle as a lot of cities, but also it's really hard to find just like a big open field and a pond and wildlife and be able to enjoy what that does to a family. And so really the estate kind of entered what we call the family around then. But when I entered the company more around 2022, when we really started to talk about this vision for it, we were like, for the longest time, we're like, well, where are we going to do this? Where are we going to put this? And we really realized like this facility could support that, and like kind of the hospitality elements we're working on the side, like could actually support what we call, I don't want to call it bourbon tourism, but if you've ever been to a huge distillery, it's more like an amusement park. Like there's lines and there's turnstiles and there's stanchions and there's places you can and you can't go. And there's hundreds of people all around you and there's parking lots and stroller parking and stuff like that. But consumers and people and customers and people, whiskey drinkers really want to be closer to the whiskey that they drink. And so it kind of built this huge idea. And it's the one that I bought into when I joined him in 2022. And we really started to figure out like, how do we bring people closer to the whiskey? And if we're going to do that, what do we need to do? And we realized that what we needed to do that looked a lot like the estate that he had purchased for kind of to be the family grounds during COVID. And so we decided to take Mortgage Hall Estate, which is what he had purchased, and turn it into the Provenance Estate. It was going to be a manor house where folks could stay, but also like, his family would stay there sometimes. But more importantly, if folks come and pick a barrel and they come and want to do a tasting and they want to stick around, like we actually have an experience for them where they can see the farm and they can meet what I call like our security team, which is really just two donkeys, right? Like we are a farm distillery and we have chickens and foxes and hawks and ravens and geese and two donkeys, Martha and George, who are kind of my coworkers at this point. I see them more than a lot of my coworkers, and they're super fun and stuff. But like, you can actually get out and we're not really ever going to be open to the public in a way where there's like a full parking lot. Like my goal is if you are at Provenance Estate and you're tasting whiskey from the barrel and doing tours and stuff, like it's very personal. It's a very elemental and experiential thing. And a lot of people use the word experiential to mean expensive, but like experiential is really like you will get to take in whiskey with all five of your senses because you're out on the farm where it's made, and you might stay at the manor house, where I sometimes stay after doing big lots of barrel selection for some of the blends we do. And so we kind of realized that you needed a home for all of these things, and Middleburg was the perfect home for that thing.
And with the hospitality, as you said, you've got places for people to stay and experiential. It's also, though, it doesn't require an overnight stay. It's about an hour or
Yeah,
so west of DC.
I'd say it's I try and get on the road by like 6 a.m. and at 6 a.m. it's about an hour from DC. It can swell if there's traffic, but this isn't something where you have to land in DC and drive another 3 or 4 hours. Like I'm there 3 to 4 days a week because it's not hard to get to, and it's actually it's a very peaceful drive. It's very straight for a very long time, and then you just kind of arrive. And the country out there is beautiful and it's easy to get around. So whenever we have barrel groups come out, or we have most people fly to DC and we'll meet them in DC and we'll have a lunch, then we head out to the distillery. It's easy enough to do in a day trip, which is really important.
Fantastic. The barrel picks to me, and this is gonna, I promise the segue will make sense. Barrel picks to me in single barrels have kind of gone one way or another. They've been either the core of a distillery's expression, or they'll be like the way out there expressions from a distillery. Not usually in between, unless it's a distributor pick or something like that. What you're doing at Provenance, you've kind of straddling the line. You have people doing single barrels, but you also have the 1787 line. And I was fortunate enough to try the 7 year, which frankly I thought was an excellent blend.
Amazing.
I went in trying to have no preconceptions. Like I do my best. I wasn't able to do this blind like I was normally, but um, no, I really enjoyed it. It seemed like this very classic bourbon flavor, but the baking spices kicked up a bit. Some ginger also that I really loved on the back end. So a little more complex than the usual cinnamon and clove that people
Great.
get.
Okay.
Not too oaky, which is great as well. And at $70 for a bottle, 7 years, 107 proof, it's not, you're not dropping a paycheck on it
Sure.
or something. It's not a huge risk. So in trying to balance uh, the two ideas, the single barrel, which you've been intimately acquainted with for several years now, of picking and choosing them, but also the blending. You mentioned you got to talk with a lot of blenders, distillers, and such to kind of learn the craft. How do you go about on a day-to-day basis balancing the two ideas of what you're trying to do both single barrels and blending at once?
Certainly, yeah. It's really fascinating because a lot of the industry and a lot of people are still like single barrels are the cream of the crop. And I always think that's fascinating because a lot of people think that blends are less interesting than single barrels. And if we really break that down, and I can't be the first person that said this, right? But like if you like a single barrel to me is a great ingredient, and an ingredient can have this whole experience attached to it, right? Like if you've ever eaten ginger, like there's a lot going on and like having a piece of ginger, but it's ultimately like a piece of a bigger recipe. And so the single barrels are great because it allows me to go through all of our inventory. Like we have a thousand plus barrels on the property, um, and at any specific point, there's only going to be a small slice of those that are ready right now. And so the single barrel you actually tried was actually just a little bit shy of 8 years, which is kind of cool. We have enough inventory. The goal is that it's always going to keep getting older, but building blends as opposed to picking single barrels. Like picking single barrels, we're looking for whiskeys that fit a very specific profile, right? So I'm looking for things that are like big and bright on the nose, and they have big, like rich palates, but aren't too oaky, but aren't too dry. But also, at 107 proof, I think it's a great proof point because it's bold and it has the richness and it has the body that we expect as whiskey drinkers. But also, if you throw it on a cube, it still has a lot of whiskey character. And if you make a cocktail with it, it's a little bit stronger than something lower on the shelf, but it's going to hold up. You can make an amazing old fashioned with it. And so for me, it's about picking single barrels that kind of tell the story of Provenance, that they have these specific elements and they may actually taste a little bit different as single barrels do, but blending for our limited edition cast strength line is kind of like taking that up a notch. It's taking some of our most expensive inventory and maybe some barrels that I've been setting aside and creating something that shines bigger and brighter than all of those independent ingredients. And also, a single barrel only yields so many bottles. Like, we're talking like 180 to 190. And so it means that only a small slice of the population gets to try that individual flavor profile you've picked out barrel to barrel. But the blends give us an opportunity to reach more people and also hopefully release a limited edition that people have an opportunity to purchase. Because it's not gone in an instant like some single barrels are. But most importantly, the flavors for me is you can take something, you can take a barrel where you're like, oh, this is 90% there, but it's missing a little more oak than I'd like it to have. And then you can find a barrel where you're like, oh, the nose on this is a little off of what I was hoping it'd be, but it is actually a little oakier on the palate. And those two things might actually fit together perfectly. And it's not to say like, well, this barrel's flawed and this barrel's flawed. Like if we find a flawed barrel, we're going to discard it. We're going to put it back in the warehouse and let it age until it's maybe 12, 14, 15, 16 years old. Because we have like the space and the property to do it. But blending to me is an amazing way to take different puzzle pieces of whiskeys and build different shapes out of them. And like this 14-year release, I'm super proud of because it took forever. we we were gonna launch Provenance in the summer, and we were like, man, the whiskey's really good, but it's just not exactly where we want it. And it wasn't because the whiskey wasn't good, but it takes a lot of time to put those puzzle pieces together, and it takes time to select those barrels. And so we're like, you only get to launch something once, and if you're gonna launch it once, it has to be. I'm not saying we make perfect whiskeys, but in my mind, I was like, it has to be perfect. It has to be everything that we want these whiskeys to be before we push them out in the world. And so it made a lot of sense for us to kind of hold that, the whole launch while the whiskey got ready. And I am super happy with the two that we kind of have started out with here.
Again, having tried the seven, I can't argue against that. It was really an excellent barrel, I should say, and at 107 proof too. There is just something about that proof that seems to be a magical proof. There's a reason a lot of brands use it. I'm sure Mike Veach has done some research into why 107 became so popular. It's not coming to me at the moment,
I
but
would imagine, yeah. And
yeah,
and it's funny too testing it, right? Like I was like, we are totally going to be a 110 proof house, and then I was like, not quite. And and like I have a lot of respect for Bullet, and I was like, maybe 104 proof house. And it turns out that like, I was like, I think 107's it, and I tasted a bunch of my colleagues on it, and they're like, this is great, man. What is it? And I was like, this is our new flagship whiskey. 107 proof, whether it's historical, like a lot of big names used in the past, but I really believe 53.5% alcohol is the perfect amount. Whether you like, I love to take our whiskeys and be like, hey, are you a whiskey drinker? And they're like, nah. And I'm like, cool, try this. And if they're like, actually this is a lot of flavor, like what is this? And I'm like, this is a Kentucky bourbon, man. This is 107 proof. Like it turns out people are actually really, it's the perfect balance between too strong and too oaky and too sweet and too bright or too heavy. And it seems to really get people going right now.
speaking of the Kentucky idea, just to jump to that for a second, the current seven is, at least according to the website, correct me if I'm wrong, the seven is from Bardstown. Not saying Bardstown Bourbon Company, I'm saying Bardstown, Kentucky, and the 14 from Frankfurt.
Correct. Yep.
Right. And you said you're coming with you're sourcing in from a bunch of different producers at this point, not just the one or two or more at this point, I should say, that could come from those two cities. Uh, is the idea going forward to still keep at least the Provenance line? Talk about Reveries in a second, but the
Sure.
Provenance line, Kentucky bourbon.
Provenance bourbon, our two releases are Kentucky. But what I can tell you is that the family will grow. And also, as families do, you know, we have a really great tranche for that 7-year release. And so, unless something changes and tons of whiskey goes out the door overnight, which I really doubt and I really hope is not the case, like the 7-year and the 14 will stay as Kentucky for the foreseeable future, just because we have the whiskey to support it. And I've actually selected enough barrels out where I'm like, okay, for the next 3, 6, 9 months, we're going to stick to Kentucky. But that doesn't mean we don't also have great whiskey from places like Oregon and Minnesota and Indiana, that are may or may not be like conventional hotbeds of whiskey. And you're actually going to see a lot of that diversity come in the blend. So there may be a time where we roll out like an Indiana program, but I'm super happy that we have enough whiskey right now to support like a 7-year Kentucky bourbon program for, I won't say like the future, right? The future implies like forever, but for the next while, like the current release, especially as it turns 8, because it'll turn 8 over the winter, will all stay Kentucky.
Gotcha. So I want to talk next about timing. There's, if anyone listening to this podcast knows, there's a lot going on about whether it's tariffs, overproduction, is there a glut, is there not a glut, um, closures or pauses at distilleries in the US and around the world. There's, I think what's not arguable at this point is simply that there is a lot of whiskey out there.
Sure.
Whether it's in the bottle, still in a barrel, what have you, there's a lot of whiskey out there. You talked about in around 20, well, let's say 2021, the last 4 years, visiting distilleries and being like, hey, I really like this. Can I buy some of this? And to me, the inflection almost sounded like, not to put it through, but like you were like begging, like, can you please give me a barrel of this or a couple barrels of this, please? We've got the demand. Um, and at that point in 21, 22, even up until about Q3 of 23, there would have been a lot of demand and fighting for barrels. Now we're looking at companies, like I said, pausing production, upping age statements, upping core range age statements just to try to use up some whiskey that's
Totally.
there. Um, you've already said, it's you don't want to distill yourself, and it's not a good time to be distilling. It's not a good time to have a lot of new make. There's a lot of great whiskey already distilled. As you've seen this change happen over the last couple of years, becoming involved with the business in 2022, how has the vision changed given the changing scenario in the whiskey industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's and I'd say the inflection point for me is less about begging for whiskey, but one of my favorite things that happened is if you buy enough whiskey from someone over a period of time, right? If I bought some single barrels from them in 2020 and then 2021 and then 21 and 22 and 23, you start to develop a relationship that goes beyond just the barrel pick, right? Like a lot of places, you come in, you do your barrel pick, you leave. It's very transactional. It's very clinical. But what was really cool is I'd start to do barrel picks with some people, and they'd say, "Hey, okay, now that you picked your barrel, we've got this weird thing, man. We want to know what you think, And I'd be like, "All right, cool. Like I like weird stuff. And so I would taste stuff, and I'd be like, "That's incredible. Like, are you physically going to do a barrel pick of this?" And they'd be like, "Oh well, we only have six of these, or we only have eight of these, or we only have 10 of these. We actually physically don't have enough whiskey to make a product out of it, right? Or management said we need to focus on our two core things, and there's just not enough of this, or it's just weird, and like it gets weird and it doesn't fit what we do." And that's when I started to be like, well, all right, if you're not going to sell it, and I think it's amazing, and I have a vision for it potentially, maybe you would sell it to me. And so that's where a lot of that started. And that's kind of how we get. I don't want to force your hand in the reveries conversation, but that was the genesis of the reveries. But going back to like the heart of your question is like, yeah, there's a ton of whiskey out there. There's so much whiskey, but also my goal is not to buy the most whiskey. My goal is to buy the right amount of whiskey from people I trust to suit the needs of what we're doing. And so, like, a lot of people panic, like, is there a crash? Like, a lot of people panic, like, you know, to me, it's a correction, right? Like, the growth that we saw during COVID was unsustainable. If the market continued at those growth patterns, it would burn out. Like, there physically wouldn't be enough wood for barrels. There physically would stress, like, the grain infrastructure. It would stress, like, employment and staffing and just like, the world also should probably not drink that much whiskey. That's probably a little too much alcohol for like the public health planet. But um, you know, and so I tend to look at it like every now and then the market has to correct itself. And a lot of these big companies, they exist to create shareholder value, and whether you're, pro that or not, but like a lot of people see like at the first sign of like correction, they're gonna make bigger corrections. And for me, like my goal has always been to scale slowly and to do things right rather than fast. And so I'm kind of off in Middleburg plodding along. Like we have a lot of whiskey now. Like I'm sure you have a lot of bottles of whiskey in your house, right? And every time you're like, well, I'm going to go on a buying freeze. And then you're like, ooh, that's shiny. We'd say that all the time. Like we have plenty of whiskey. We're not going to buy any more. And then 48 hours later, someone's emailed me and they're like, dude, I got this crazy thing. And then I'm like, hello, accountant. We need to wire some guy because we need to buy some more whiskey. And then they're like, what are you doing, man? So like my view of acquisition is like there's a lot of whiskey out there, but also there's still a lot of people who are buying whiskey. There's people, there's other non-distilling producers who have their own innovative takes on the industry, and the industry is self-correcting for a time where they made the most whiskey that they've ever made before. Like it couldn't go forever, and so it makes sense that there's a lot of whiskey out there. But people also ask me if I'm panicking. I'm like, no, we have this cool innovative thing. Like did the world need another whiskey brand that was just another whiskey brand? No. But did we bring something innovative to the table that I'm passionate about, that I feel like people are interested in, like a genuine story and some really delicious whiskey at a price that I think is super fair? Like, yes. And I feel like as long as we continue to stay on that track, that is what people want and that's what people are interested in. And also I love the like people ask me all the time what whiskey I drink every day and like from like a conventional brand, and it's not Creek 12. Like I'm thrilled. The growth during COVID got us a $75 12-year-old whiskey, from Beam and stuff. And those guys will always have this tremendous scale of economy to do whiskey releases like that. But I ultimately think that like a lot of people are so happy that the market is like in a downturn. That's so funny to me. But like there's more whiskey than there's ever been. There's great new releases from new brands. There's great new releases like the stuff we're working on. The big boys are adding age statements. Like this is the golden era of whiskey, no matter who you are, in my opinion. And I try and keep that perspective because there's a lot of things to be sad about, but also there's a lot of things to be super excited about. And I couldn't be more excited about the whiskeys that we get to release and the whiskeys I get to buy from other producers, kind of despite what's going on around us.
For sure. And like I said, even if there's a lot more whiskey to choose from, you want to choose the best. It's also, you have the option. You can look around and say, I don't have to buy this barrel. I don't have to buy this lot because there's another producer that's making more. This producer might be making more or have more aging to my specifications really shortly. So I do want to talk about the reveries and devote some time to that in the 20-25 minutes we got. Um, one more item I wanted to talk about, and this is more about kind of your brand and your history. So at the Provenance Estate, a couple months ago, you had hundreds of people show up for 10 years
Oh
of
yeah,
take, which is impressive. I mean, we're not really traveling much anymore. we're um, and it's to have that kind of following. I mean, being a moderator of our bourbon for several years, of being, like I said, one of the kind of most prolific single barrel pickers of our era, which is kind of redundant because there really hasn't been another era of single barrels now to think about it, but take that for what you will. The biggest question I think I had was in leaving the kind of previous chapter behind for practical purposes and moving your full attention onto provenance, onto the reveries, what you're doing here. What are your thoughts on being able to um, carry over a certain amount of the followership and brand identity that you've built over the last 10 years and how that will support this new venture going forward?
sure. Yeah, I think it's also probably important to say like the single barrel program's not going anywhere. Um,
True. Yeah.
so to me, it's more about evolution than transition. So because like I have all these great producer relationships because of the single barrel program. I'm not about to miss out on meeting some new amazing producer by getting rid of the single barrel program. So, you know, um, I'm tremendously thankful. It's a privilege to have everyone who has found me and joined along for the ride through that program. And I'm just one piece of the big wheel that is our bourbon, and that is also super cool. I'm probably, you know, among the more public of the moderators, but I think I'm in the middle in terms of seniority, which is kind of a great place to be. And there's people who are newer than I am as mods. There's people who are older than I am as mods. But when I took on the single barrel thing, it definitely, people were like, "Who's going to do it?" And I was like, "I have some free time. I'll give it a shot. Like, we'll see how it goes." But long story short, it is kind of funny that it is a brand, right? Like Take is a brand, and I'm like, if I had known that it would have taken off, I probably would have picked something a little more intuitive, than the name that I picked in 2010. But also, I'm super thankful that I just used is the name that I had always used for everything because it's distinctive, right? It's unique. I don't know anyone else out there using it. The U.S. the trademark office agreed. Like I own the trademark now, which is super cool. And so like as I moved on from the Raiders org and they've rebranded and I've become my own independent person again and owning all of my IP and trademark, it kind of reminds me that like you know the brand is me and I'm the brand. There's so much more behind the brand, and the brand wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the people. And that's what that whole festival was about. Was I was like, I people like speech, and I was like, all right, I'll say a few words. But like, if it wasn't for all the people who follow and take part and are part of the community and talk to each other and talk to me, like the festival is really about recognizing those people and be like, none of this, the reveries wouldn't exist, Provenance wouldn't exist, the single barrel program wouldn't exist. Like I would still be a corporate software guy in Wisconsin. And so like it reminds me of the value of community. When you build a brand on community, you also kind of have to do everything that you can to make sure that it stays a community and is welcoming and insightful and offers value that isn't just, maybe it's products, right? It's single barrel bottles, but also a forum and a discussion, a place for people to talk and bond and feel like they can be, they can express themselves, but also be heard and be respected and stuff. But, my goal is that the brand will always be around and hopefully so because I have a lot of whiskey to make and I'm involved in provenance and I'm involved in reveries and I'm still involved in reviews and barrel picks and stuff. And I'm curious what the future holds. So I'd say it's mostly evolution than a transition because the single barrels are staying. And I'm curious, I'm thankful for folks that join for this next chapter and hopefully all the chapters after that as well.
All right. The reveries. The reveries are your, as you were saying, your, let's call it a mix of experimentals, extremes, crazy ideas, really good stuff that's a little rare or very rare. Um, when you're approaching the 1787 line, the 7 and 14-year-old versus the reveries, when you're looking at a product, potential product, barrel, and thinking, okay, this is going to go into this program, this is going to go into that program.
Sure.
What's your thought process like?
Yeah, and it's fascinating because a lot of people assume that it's either or, right? It's the Reveries or Provenance, which is bigger. Like a lot of people ask, which is bigger, which is older, which is newer, which is more expensive? Like what's the real brand? Which is a super funny question to get. Like they're both real, man. Like they're both right here. They're physical products. But um, originally the Reveries and Provenance were supposed to launch side by side, and it's really easy to tell a story when you have all the pieces on day one. Um, but as we talked about a little bit earlier, we actually held back the launch of Provenance because the whiskey wasn't exactly where I wanted to be. And so I actually told like half the story and I'm super thankful. Like the Reveries took off more than I anticipated, faster than I anticipated. What actually was like, oh, this is actually getting really interesting because I actually need to start moving into the second and third phase of the Reveries, as we're now launching Provenance. And so my methodology really is that the Reveries is what I call R&D. It's like the lab. It's where the crazy goes, and so like, it's where I'm experimenting on a lot of stuff. And you guys have seen just a piece of what's come out because it's the stuff that has been experimental. But I've been like, this is it, man. This is good to go. And like groups come and do to picks for the Reveries and like this is amazing stuff. And the blends have been well received. But in the back of my head, knowing like it is not sustainable from a national scale. Like when distilleries make weird stuff, they only make a little bit of it. And the Reveries is avant garde and it's kind of irreverent. It like is very much rooted in the way that I see the industry and like have sought to. I hate the word disrupt because everyone who runs like a scam crypto company is like we're disrupting everything, and so like it has a negative connotation. But you know, all the years that I did the single barrel program and the way I do stuff, people like we've never worked with someone who does things the way you do it, and it's a little scary, but it's because we don't understand it, and there's tremendous potential, and it's so cool, and like it's like a shake up in a cool, creative way. And so when I pitched the Reveries, and I was like, guys, like this is the thing I want to do alongside Provenance because it fits perfectly. It's irreverent, it's weird, it's like it's too weird to live and it's too rare to die, and it's like it's these crazy things I have access to and these blends I want to do, and they're like, this is insane stuff, but like you have to do it. Where Provenance is more, is meant to be a national brand. It has whiskey behind it that is a little more scalable. It has more consistent profiles. It has the ability to do single barrels where folks like, we all know, like, I'm trying to think of the right way to put it, but like, what's the point of having a cool single barrel program if if there's not enough whiskey that people who want it can come and get it? And so, and also like the names like Raven and I got a release called God's Revolver and like the Reveries, like also is not meant to be for everyone. Like there's not a lot of people who are like, hell yes, give me the black matte label with the golden snake and these weird names and like all this interesting ideology. And so um, the two fit together really perfectly now that they're both out, and it's really a pleasure to get to talk about them. Is like one is like the dark side of the moon, and like it's not going to be for everyone, and it's super small and it's a little more expensive, and you're going to have something that's super crazy and weird, and like and Provenance is kind of the brighter side of the moon where it's like it's amazing straight whiskey. It's amazing straight whiskey at prices and is great bourbon, and like someday there might be a rye or wheat, but like it's also something that we can scale a little bit more because we can get more barrels of whiskey that's going to meet that profile we talked about in the beginning. And like I can make a 14-year blend that's actually big enough to service enough people who are interested in it. Whereas like some of the blends I build with Reveries and I'm like, shoot, it's physically can only be this big because one of the components was like a barrel and a half, and that's all I can get my hands on and stuff. So the two come together with a lot of great synthesis and let me kind of push them forward because a lot of people are interested in both sides. Like, there's a lot of people who are like, I want a ton of Provenance and a little Reveries. And there's a lot of people like, I want a lot of Reveries and a little bit of Provenance. And so we can kind of serve all of the whiskey drinkers that I've met along the way with those two brands, kind of the way they're built to work. So hopefully that was a very rambling answer, but I I'm passionate about them both, and it's kind of fun because for a long time I had to be like, "Yep, it's the Reveries," and then knowing that we have this big looming whale of a whiskey brand, like I'm super pumped with. I'm like, with Provenance, I have a team, an amazing team of people who help me do all the things I'm bad at. Because it turns out I'm only good at a very specific sort of thing, like writing about whiskey on the internet and making whiskey is one of them. But like, it's good to have accountants and compliance people and people to help with production, and all of that's unlocked through Provenance.
So before we go further, I have to say that my wife would kill me if I didn't call out this reference. Beautiful Panic at the Disco reference you threw in there. And if you're over 40, you probably didn't get it, but that's totally fine. We welcome you anyway. Thank you for listening. The so with the reveries, you were talking last month about how you said you've got amazing whiskeys laid down there. Family's going to grow on that too. You've got bourbons for sure, rye, wheat coming down. You even mentioned that you might do some like cognac, armagnac, rum, even some gin,
Oh
which
yeah,
we've already established not really your thing. So what is
wasn't my thing.
wasn't your thing? Okay,
I mean, when you drink the kind of gin that a 20-year-old can afford, sorry, 21, always 21, 21, drink responsibly. When you only have tried the kind of gin that a 20-year-old, 21-year-old can afford, like you are not pulling from the best. So I've gone back to revisit gin, many years ago as like an adult and found incredible gins, and it's built like same with rum, cognac, all that stuff, armagnac, like brandies, like, huge appreciation for them. I actually have a silly amount of gin on the property, and it's been fun to experiment. So if you thought weird whiskey was the end of it, it's actually just the beginning. There's going to be some gin releases across the brands later this year that I'm super pumped about.
so I'm going to be looking for those because I'm kind of a big gin fan, which I didn't think I would be, but a couple years ago tried a great old Tom style, and
Hell yeah.
what can I say? Off to the races. Came back from London with more gin than whiskey. Uh, Granted, the whiskey I got was from Imperial, but different style, different story. The I guess the question I have is you're obviously putting forward this program that's going to have so many different options, limited options at that, but a lot of different things that people can pull from, different styles, different spirits that they can look for. Um, what is the plan to kind of prevent yourself or the team from going too wide as at the expense of going too deep?
That's an interesting one. We're a pretty small team, which I think is really helpful, but um, you can also over experiment. I actually really like that we have the Reveries as a sandbox, and like Provenance is the opposite of a sandbox. So, um, you know, I think if I'm getting your question right, it's like how do you avoid doing too much and too little at the same time, right? Like
Right.
my goal really is that we don't do everything. Like people have asked me, like, "Hey man, when's Providence Rye coming?" I go, "I don't know. Like it's not ready yet. We'll focus on that later. When is Wheated Bourbon coming? When is the Reveries going to do this thing?" And it's like we are just getting started, and you have to have some focus. Like I spent, I grew up as a kid with ADD, right? Like everyone around me yelled focus every time I got distracted, and they still do. And like people should do it more. But the one thing I've learned is that you can't lose focus because there's so much whiskey out there, right? Like there's so many different ideas, but like I have to remember what makes us great. And what we do great is very clearly defined, and so we have to stick to that. And it's easy to get distracted, but also like, you know, we have very good swim lanes of things where like you can do too much crazy stuff, but it still has to taste good at the end of the day. And so knowing that like, the Reveries is not meant to scale infinitely, and neither is Provenance. The goal is not to sell as much Provenance as humanly possible. And so when you think about making the best whiskeys humanly possible in the volumes that make sense for what you're doing, it's a little less tempting to get distracted by this thing over here and this thing over here and this new whiskey over here. And so I think it's really good. Like a lot of people like, wait, you're not coming to market with like seven different whiskeys. And it's like, no, no, we have our 7-year single barrel and our 14-year cask strength. And the 14, like the limited edition cask strength, it'll change from season to season and maybe year to year. But there's a reason that we picked two things and we try to do those two things as best as possible. And even on the Reverie side, there's been a variety of single barrels, and then there's Raven. And so like sometimes it feels like it gets big, but like it's actually pretty easy to break up the brands and put them in these swim lanes and like, keep those swim lanes. So there will always be more products later on, but we have to master what we're releasing now, before we justify doing a bunch of other stuff. Because if every person that I don't hand, that I if I hand a bottle of Providence 7 to everyone. I want them to love it and know that like this was made with intention and that takes a certain level of time. So we have to dedicate it.
With that, with that said, I think it's a great segue to the next question, which is, you're a month, a little over a month since the official launch. Certainly, I've gotten to try it. I know a number of other, let's say, media people have tried it because I hate the influencer term. Let's say media people. What has been the kind of non-media response so far? Because I'll say the media response so far has been pretty damn positive across the board. So in interacting with people on the street, or as it were, or at the estate, what has their response been to your products?
Man, it's been great, and I appreciate you saying so on the media side. I know the whiskey world really well, so I was like, I'm a little nervous, as one always is when you make something. But generally, I feel like I made a whiskey that people like. But I definitely we liked 107 proof the best, but I was like, I'm actually curious. We all know people, right, who drink 80 proof whiskey and are like, wow, that's high octane. Like we've all listened to every country song ever that's like, give me that strong stuff. And they talk about 80 proof, which is the legal minimum, So like
And
there is like a
most of us have been there at some point. Like I started with Ezra Brooks
totally.
Black Label, and I had to put it in the fridge because that was the only way I could drink it. Otherwise, it was too hot. So
Yeah, yeah. And myself as well, right? And so that actually gave me like a natural, like, oh my gosh, like I hope people taste the flavor and the richness and all these other things, right? That go into this whiskey and hopefully, it's palatable and enjoyable. And so far, like people have been like, and I like a lot of people would be like, oh, I'm surprised you love to hear it. But like people are like, this is the smoothest 100 proof whiskey I've ever had. And I tell them like, well, actually it's 107, Um, and that really speaks to the kind of profile we're pulling out, right? Like I wanted to have just the right amount of oak. Like I'm not a big oak guy. The oak needs to be super well integrated. The sweetness needs to be in check. Like there can be a little spice because that balances both the oak and the sweetness. So uh, the feedback has been really great. Like we've had every just like friends, family, like athletes that we know. We've had people who are just like I love wine or I don't drink at all. Or like people are like I'm big whiskey people or not big whiskey people. And so far like it's been really cool to see people latch onto the product and try it and be like, I would have never known this is 107 proof, or like, man, I drink this. Like, a guy talking to the other day, he's like, I'm an Evan Williams bottled and bond guy, but like, he was like, this is great. And honestly, the proof to me, the proof is not the blocker that I kind of thought it would be in the public opinion. And I think it goes to show that when you pick profiles that pair with the proofs perfectly, like our goal is not to be the highest proof whiskey yet. Hopefully you never see a like 159 proof provenance because it's a very different exercise. But people have had a great time coming out, and I've actually got people coming out this weekend who are like, "Cool, we love it. Can we come check out the farms? We're going to feed some donkeys and taste some barrels and just kind of get people close to the whiskey, which is what I'm passionate about." But feedback so far has been great. We the 14 is sold out basically, except for a couple of in-store retailers and bars in DC, which was unexpected because I thought I'd made enough for the whole fourth quarter. So now we're like, we have a good problem. We got to bottle more of it that I was planning to save for next year. But so that kind of feedback is all really encouraging, and it's a great pleasure to get to talk to people like you, right, who want to learn more and share with their audiences and their brands and their friends and families and stuff. But um, the hardest part of doing something is pushing go and putting it out to the world. And so it was exciting to launch the brand, but it is way more exciting to see people responding to the brand and be like, all right, cool. The whiskey, we knew the whiskey was good and we love the whiskey, but everyone around us is trying it is also loving the whiskey and they're loving it for the reasons that we built the whiskey. And that to me is really meaningful.
And so I know we're on limited time, so I got two more questions for you that I'll ask you for now. The first one being, in talking about the different products that you have, as we talked about, the evolution of not just the product itself, but the sources from which you're building each of these products, whether it be single barrel blends or somewhere in between. It it does sound to me implicitly like there isn't really going to be a house profile in terms of what we think of, like, nutty notes from Beam or
Sure.
something like that. There's not going to be that, but having the having read a lot of your tasting notes, a lot of reviews, knowing just from that the way that you think about whiskey and the way that you think about tasting, do you feel like there's still a profile that will be identifiably provenance? at least let's limit it at least to the widely available, not super out there stuff. Like
Sure.
the
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah. Are you, so you're asking if there will be like a house profile?
know, I guess the way that I'm understanding is there won't be a house profile in terms of flavor because the flavor is going to change depending on what blend you're making,
Sure.
on what sources you're coming from. But is there something else in the flavor profile in the product that you feel is going to be your mark? That's
Totally. I read you now. Kind of like we talked about how seven comes to be, right? Like there's a whole selection kind of criteria and stuff. Um, our profile really is that there are things like I am naturally inclined to love things that taste like creme brulee. Like a lot of people are like, wow, that's really specific, but I love burnt sugar.
nope,
I love some
nope,
baking spice. I love
guilty.
big vanillas. Like I love the texture of creme brulee is so fascinating because it's like crunchy and then it's smooth and it's rich and it's like opulent, you know. And so there will always be a part of me that loves whiskeys that remind me of creme brulee. But most importantly, you know, I really focus on like proof and tannin. Those things are really important to me too, because like how a tannin is integrated in the whiskey or like how the whiskey is tannic or not, really defines how you drink it, right? Like we've had big bold oaky whiskeys that pull all the moisture out of your mouth, like some of those big wines. And like what I've learned is that when most people have whiskeys like that, they're like, oh, that was interesting, but like I don't need it anymore. Like I'm satisfied. Like that, it's it's a different experience and it sticks out because it's unique, but maybe it's not the experience where folks are like, I want more of that. Like I'm super into it. And so one of my goals is that everything in Provenance's profile is actually going to have a really approachable profile to it in the way that it tastes, like the way it sticks to your cheeks and your tongue and the roof of your mouth, and like how the proof expresses itself. But most importantly, how the tannin is integrated too. Like I actually love like one of the most insightful things I ever learned is I did a tour at Maker's Mark like years ago, and they're like yeah, this thing has a super quick clean finish because like that's what gets people interested in having another pour of whiskey. And I was like, sorry, there's a siren.
Okay.
City life, man. Uh, but it was fascinating to me because like the word smooth is so condemned, right? Like heaven forbid something tastes like gentle and progressive and like have like a nice smooth movement from front to back. And so like I kind of realized that like the things that I like in our whiskeys are when they are big and desserty and when they have big flavors, but also they have really, really elegant feelings and the tannins work really nicely with the way our mouths work and the way that people think about stuff. And so like you can have a big whiskey that has a big nose and has lots of these big dessert and spice characters. But as we get to the finish, like I want to leave you with some light sweet notes and like be very, I call it concise and clean. Heaven forbid I use the word smooth, but like those things are the things that define our whiskeys. And those are the things like I hope that people feel they feel in each of our releases because that's how I'm selecting them. And that's the consistency I want people. And like, yeah, this barrel might have a little more fruit, like baked apple and cinnamon. And this one may actually be a little more peppery, but like ultimately you're going to have the same hopeful kind of drinking experience because they've been selected for those qualities as well as just like, my goal is not like everyone's a vanilla bomb, right? But this one's bitter and nasty and this one's super hot. But like, so like trying to focus on some of the other elements that are really important to how we taste whiskey and make those clearly defined in the barrels that become provenance.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I'm with you in terms of the number one thing I really dislike, as long as everything else is in place, is feeling like it's chewing on an oak stave.
Totally nasty, man. It's just not for
I
me. Like I,
no,
I respect people, and it's actually fun. Like I really don't typically align with like super big, gnarly Napa Cabernets, and like I actually went to Napa for a week this year and like learned a lot about Napa Cabernets and like people who make them and how they make them and why they make them and the people that like them and stuff. And like there's a lot to be learned there, but it's a dominant flavor profile, but it's just not one that I attach with, and it's not for everyone as well.
agreed. We want people to drink more within reason, like you said, but I don't think we're going back to 1800s pre-pro levels of drinking quite yet. And I don't think anyone has time. Uh, in I got one more minute with you. I'll ask you the last question for now, and just thank you in advance for coming on. It's been a real pleasure, talking to you, making this happen, tasting the product. Hope it gets to taste more in the future. Um, my last question for you is, without getting too personal as to what the scenario was when you couldn't drink too much. Let's say, God forbid, that happens again, and you can have one barrel or product of what you've got in stock right now. What barrel or product do you want from like the Provenance estate?
Oh
What's the
man,
one that you're going to
it's
keep last?
There's a well, this is kind of a loaded question because you always bottle your favorite thing first and hope you find another one of it later. But we pulled a lot of samples from barrel number one, which is what we kind of call like the founder's barrel, which is the barrel that we all agreed like this is when you launch a brand, you have to send like you send out some samples to media like yourself, like we share some with friends, families, vendors. We had a launch party. We want to share bottles with that. So there is, you know, barrels 1 through 7 are just numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then after that it's like their actual serial code. So like if you ever see a single digit provenance out there, and hopefully if you've ordered one off the internet and tried one or whatever you've received is one of those single digit barrels, those are super fun because that's like the first family of launches. And then I have two that I'm releasing to the single barrel program later this month, early November, that are kind of two favorites of mine. So I'm all in on the 7. I love 107 proof. I think the scenario you described is like your desert island scenario. If I'm ever trapped on the desert island with a warehouse of my whiskey, I know it's going to be one of those single digit barrels.
All right, got it. Well, thanks so much, Jay, for coming on. It's really a pleasure. Like I said, we will have show notes where you can follow, where you can subscribe, so you know when those barrels and products are coming out and where you can find them. With that, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Jay, for coming on. Thank you to Lauren, who's not on right now, but is in the background for setting this up. And I'll see y'all next week.
Rock on, man. Thanks so much for having me.